when you're an employee, like there's only so much work you can put in, and there's only so much like vibe and energy you can put in. But when you lead from the front, it's like it means everything.
The Interpreting Wine Hospitality Summit was recorded in September 2020, with the world recovering from the global pandemic and the hospitality sector still particularly challenged. Allow me, Interpreting Wine founder Lawrence Francis, to be your guide to this series of 7 episodes featuring some of the UK's most respected voices discussing the impacts of the pandemic on food, wine, cocktails, bars, retail and events. Listen, share ideas and reconnect during this 4-day virtual summit held across web, podcast and social media. Please do share content and ideas using the hashtag IWSummit and encourage anyone who might be interested to sign up at interpretingwine.com/summit. Welcome to Day 1, Session 2 of the Interpreting Wine Hospitality Summit 2020. We continue with wine and pay a visit to Quality Wines Farringdon to meet Gus Gluck. Possibly my favourite place to drink wine in London, not least down to Gus's warm welcome, wine selection and intimate atmosphere. He led innovation in response to COVID-19 and was the first person I saw using taster sizes for Instagram live tastings. Gus reflects on the days and weeks before lockdown, when the writing was increasingly on the wall about the severity of COVID. Before he brings us up to date and discusses how Quality Wines has adapted and continues to operate without losing its soul. He talks about the challenge of converting former retail customers back to eating in and paying the premium for service. Gus gives a high-level review of innovation in the sector during lockdown, discussing the can-do attitude he saw and continues to see, the impacts of lockdown on mental health at all levels in the industry, in the wake of those businesses who closed their doors for good this year. We discussed the idea of no-shows post-COVID and the unseen cost of rent, before looking ahead for his new business, GB Wineshippers, and the clients he serves. Enjoy.
Well, hello, my name is Gus Gluck. We are currently in a place called Quality Wines Farringdon, which I founded in 2018. But my experience started quite many years ago. I've done 3 vintages across the globe and have worked in wine bars since I kind of started work. So it's really my expertise. I now have a wine importing business called GB Wineshippers, which we are drinking one of the wines that I import from Chablis, from a producer called Yannick Cadilleux. Yes, we are currently in something called Quality Wines Farringdon, which is my definitive work up until this point, in which I was working when COVID struck.
As it tends to happen a lot, we were sort of talking before the mic came on about some of the things that stood out for me about you, really, in the early days of the lockdown. So, I guess really, maybe take us a bit more inside of, like, what was that like, being primarily in a service environment, and for those that had not been here, maybe just describe a little bit that charm, that kind of the idea of the venue as well.
So Quality Wines, Quality Wines Farringdon is a magical little place because I was tasked with turning it into the best wine bar in London, which I still think it is to this day, under Chris and Joey and Nick. It is one of those sorts of places which was very socially undistanced. It was a small place where people would come in and be jammed up against each other. People would share wine, hug each other. Some of my customers ended up are now in relationships together. A lot of my customers are extremely good friends with each other. They've gone to each other's weddings. It was a very community-led place, which it still is. But obviously in this new world it is no longer as touchy-feely, because that's basically what I am. But we can kind of start at the beginning, which is not so much in March when the lockdown hit, but was probably a little bit before, which was with a lot of hospitality businesses. They started to feel a lot of pain around the late February time, where suddenly footfall was starting to dry up massively. People stopped going out. They were getting a bit more worried, and us personally as team members, we started to get a bit more concerned with the potential ramifications of that. So I'm not sure the exact date, but it was the Saturday before lockdown. For us was almost a last hurrah of what it used to be, but it was mostly filled with regulars. Because Quality Wines has always been somewhere where it has almost has 60 to 80% regulars every night. It's one of those wine bars. It's not like a come out destination. Even though it became a destination, it was supposed to be always a community place. But if we go back to the start, it was already starting to get slower, and I think a lot of businesses got quite slow in that kind of February time.
But presumably, though, as you say, that mix of regulars versus non-regulars, for want of a better word, I guess there was some cushion there, though, right? It was like people were they were willing to make the what risk there was or what fear they felt. They wanted to support you.
Like, we had a great reputation that helped us weather that kind of January, February time of when customers started to drop off somewhat. And because we were such a small business and we'd always worked it where it was so small that we all did everything. Like, so Nick, who's the extremely talented and amazing chef here, like when he was on holiday, I would be cooking, because in a weird way it was nicer for the customers to see me cooking than like another chef, because they felt like they can. It's still family. It's a family restaurant with no one who's related to each other. We were lucky that or they are, because I'm no longer with them. I support them from the sidelines, selling them wine. But it's lucky at that point that we had such a good reputation to keep us going during that tough period. But then, obviously, that Monday was the disaster, really weak, and that was the first of lockdown. For us here, it was quite a tough week, because Quality Wines is part of a group, which is Woodhead Restaurant Group, and there's some amazing restaurants part of it, including the Quality Chop House next door, but Clipstone, Portland, and Amelia. And on that Monday, Tuesday, we, just like everyone in the business, we assumed that the worst had happened and that there was going to be no government help for this situation. So the majority of people thought that they were just redundant overnight. And some people were told by their companies, not here, but they were told by other hospitality companies that they were made redundant. So that was probably the toughest week, I think. I turned up to work, and we obviously weren't going to do nights, but I came to turn up to start selling wine. So we started moving wine from the other restaurants to start selling. And then on that Friday, I think that was when the furlough announcement came in to support hospitality. But I have to be unequivocally clear and honest during that period that, I think it was at least out of those 4 days, at least 2 or 3 of those mornings I'd wake up and just burst into tears just in the shower, because I just thought every friend, like all my friends and colleagues, have all lost their jobs. It wasn't for me so much, but it was far more thinking that there's just too many talented people in this business, and people who do it for the love of it, that it just can't end like this. But then thankfully we had furlough scheme come in, even though it wasn't really explained, and that was when the start of the business turning into something different happened. So because there was obviously no service, it was retail took off. It went up by 300% of what it was. So we're selling a lot.
And that's just still people coming into Quality Wines,
just
taking bottles,
And also we kind of changed how this was, so we moved out all the tables and chairs. There was just literally booze everywhere in there. There was stacks of pasta and
Sounds
veg,
terrible.
and there was literally booze everywhere. And my personal task during that time was to make sure that that we were selling a lot of wine, firstly, because for me at that point, even though it was never ever said to me, but I just thought at least every bottle sold could be another hour of wage that I'm paying for someone else, and that for every bit sold it's helping the company. Like the owners of the company are personal friends, and they've been like absolutely critical for my career, and I really felt that this was a period to be counted and not to like shy away from these moments. But it wasn't just that, though. We weren't just retailing, but also my job was also to cook staff food for everyone. So it's very important to make sure everyone eats and do some cleaning, obviously, but also to keep up the communication with our really long list of regulars and locals and people who are vulnerable, both with making sure they had wine and food, but if they needed something dropped off that they could, that making sure that they were okay, because a lot of them are American or Australian and they're very far from home. So that was always quite a concern, was these people have paid my wage for the past 2 years. I'm not going to just sit at home and not think about them. But then the next stage was then thinking, okay, people are going to be drinking a lot of wine, but what wine will they be drinking? I need to keep up communication of that. So started, which you've seen before, the virtual kind of tastings I did on Instagram Live. I did the blind wine tastings. I had wine producers, tried to basically keep up positivity during that time with those kind of projects, which were very, very funny and good fun, but also just to remind people that drinking is not always supposed to be serious, that it is supposed to be quite fun, and that it should be whimsical, and that even with wine it's not something just to be like stared at and kind of fetishized. It is also truly like a product that gets you a bit tipsy and hopefully helps you engage with someone you wouldn't normally engage with. So it was, for me, it was the nicest thing when people were like flirting with each other over Instagram chat on these silly blind wine tastings.
But I got to say, though, I mean, I suspected as much that you'd be sort of too modest to mention it. But I told you outside. I mean, for me, you were the first the first person I saw, that really, I think, made an important distinction between, okay, we're going to be going out to an event where there's going to be wines poured and they can each pour us, a serving portion, versus, hold on, we're going to be at home now, and if we're on a Wednesday night Instagram Live or a Zoom or whatever the channel, we don't necessarily want to be opening like 6, 7, 15ml bottles the next day. And you decanted your wines into smaller bottles, and I think there was a local geographical restriction because they had to get to people in the deep. But hats off to you. You were the first one that I saw that actually realised we need to do this slightly differently. And then also beyond that, it was just that element of the blind tasting, and they learn with you. And there was actually then, for me, there was like, as well as the actual content, there was an additional reason to kind of tune in live, and the guesses started coming in through the chat. And sometimes they're a bit wide of the mark.
But like, it didn't really matter, because it was just more about the kind of like joy of it. I mean, for me, like, my biggest worry is I wake up one day and then no one is drinking wine again. That they're all just drinking hard seltzers, and that no one actually cares about it when it's like a way to travel. It's it's a moment in time trapped in grape juice. It's kind of something that's fundamentally, for me, amazing and romantic. And I'd never want to be. I never want to look back at myself and say that in hard times I wasn't helping push that and make sure that people were still drinking wine and being passionate about it, because that's all I can. Like, if you've got a platform, you've got to use it just like you have to make sure people are still really interested in wine and just love it as much as we do. So that was the other side of it, is to keep up that communication. Which was funny for me because I never probably made as much. I never talked to so many what would be considered like wine influencers over that period of time. Just because they were all being so nice, like to me personally, and also just to like bounce ideas off them. So that was really like great. Just because a lot of people who, let's say, have a big Instagram accounts on wine, people think of them as some sort of terrible narcissist who are doing it for the money, when really most of them actually just do it. They don't really make any money at all, or they literally get sometimes a free bottle here and there, but they do it mostly because they truly just care. So that for me was a really important distinction to grow with during that time. They were fun tastings. So me personally, I planned to start importing wine anyway, with my business partner Richard Bray, who's a fantastic winemaker and wine writer. And so for me, that had to quicken the kind of pace, because what became quite apparent quite early on was that I firstly couldn't do two jobs at the same time. I wanted to try and do something in the worst possible time ever, which is COVID, and trying to do logistics in a time when everyone else is doing it. But it was an important time. I mean, for me, a lot of my friends across the globe are people who make wine or grow grapes, and my ultimate aim has always been, I think, in life, to always know that I represent them. So I've always represented them by selling them at a wine bar or a wine shop, and now I get to each day actually talk to them about how best we can position their wines, or how best that, or like what I'm doing to do with their wines, or see how they can be sold. Because some of them are not easy to sell. They're not simple. Or even something like that we're drinking now it's Chablis, so it's so competitive. There's probably like 140 producers in Chablis, and this is a guy who's in his like late 40s, this is his first vintage, and it's just like it's not an easy sell, but I have to communicate his story and his plot of land, and that the wines taste really nice. So that was for me my own personal journey, and I think for everyone at the moment, it's like they can stick to their job and make sure they get their wage, which I would recommend to almost everyone. I would not do what I did and try and start something too risky where you have to try and pay yourself. But also, like, if you're willing to deal with the kind of mental strain of it, then it's like a good idea to do. It all depends on if you're willing to go through those sorts of mental struggles of starting something. But thankfully, the business is actually technically a very family business, wine in general, and the amount of people who've been so supportive, people that I'm technically what would be considered in competition with, has been utterly astounding and generous and lovely. So it gives me faith for the future, really, of wine in general, that people aren't being too competitive about it, that it'll always have like a future where people, no matter who they are and what they are, as how they've been brought up, even if they're really difficult people who are like technically slight psychopaths, some of them, wine helps them to engage with others, and it creates a bond between you and them. So that's been really, really joyful, actually. But also, it's not just been me as well who's had quite big transitions as well. It's just this business has had such a transition during then. I'd be remiss to not talk about Nick and the work he was doing when he wasn't working. So because the Quality Wines didn't open again until June, but he was cooking for the NHS like every week, like making hundreds of meals for an organisation called Deliverate, and we were taking food to the local homeless shelters each Sunday as well. So I thought it'd be worth mentioning that.
And I presume this was kind of so early, I guess, into the pandemic that a lot of those services that those people were depending on had 100% had gone by the way.
Yeah, so we were even talking to the local church as well to make sure they had food and stuff. And it's just one of those things where, like, if you truly... Basically, like, if you get into hospitality, you're in hospitality for two things. You do it for the money because there's nothing else you can do, because you maybe have committed some crimes, or not even legal crimes, but you've just it's a place which doesn't judge you on before, it just judges you on your ethic of that day, or you do it only purely for the love of it. And those two are interchangeable. They're very easily interchangeable, those two things. And the people who truly love it, they really care about people. They want people to enjoy themselves, and they just want people to eat. And Nick has that in him, and a lot of chefs have that in them, and a lot of chefs took part in these projects, and it shows to me that just again how many amazing people there are in the business who really care. And it wasn't just us, and it wasn't just there was like the Whiskey Exchange, Dawn, and people like that who did a big old fundraiser, which I actually bought some whiskey from, and it's like small fry, and but they're big things. They're statements of intent. This business makes loads of money, but it was lovely to see people who didn't have loads of money trying to give whatever they had, or just to keep it going. But what's so interesting now is to see what Quality Wines was and now is, which is people wear masks and half the tables. It's a very different sort of business. It's a very different sort of dining experience, I think, for anyone. But I think, like, even being here, for me, the soul's not gone, and I think that's a really important thing to say, is that truly great places, I think, always like keep their soul, even if things change. Like, there's still like restaurants you go to which are like terrible now, but because they've got history or the great times had there, they still have that spark. And what's great for them is their team's stronger than with me, because I was I was very good at what I did, but not as good as they are now, because they've been through it. They've been through a really tough time together, and that kind of stuff helps focus you so much more. But yeah, and I don't really know what else to say really about it. But with me, with the new business, and I have this weird brain where I flip flop between things. So I'm really sorry about that, Lawrence. Like the projects I'm now working on with, like even some of my clients, is to make sure that they have that they're not just buying wine, but seeing what they need for their future. So even helping them make and label wine so that people don't actually know how much they cost in the first place, so they can try and make some margin. Because there's this hilarious thing with restauranting, which everyone's afraid to talk about, which is making money. That it's like that's a sad thing to try and make money. And I felt ashamed my whole career. I've always felt like things have been too expensive for what they are, but that's not defined by me. That's defined by the economy and bloody rent, like factors that I'm so small fry. And so I think no one should ever be ashamed of trying to make their business work and making margin. So I'm trying to find products for them that work and they can make some margin on to help them succeed. And that is, for me, a really exciting kind of next step really for a lot of businesses, is to how do they move forward? Because what's interesting is how many businesses have moved to retail, and now they move back to restauranting. They have to get people to pay back what they were being charged in a restaurant before. But now a lot of customers know how much wines are retail, but they don't want to buy those wines in a restaurant, because they're like, oh, but that cost me £25 retail, why is it now £70? And they feel very affronted. So if you take away that conversation, it makes it so much easier for them, because it's like, it was always quite tiresome before to explain to people how much it costs to put on a show, because a restaurant service is a show. It's not a it's not like a charity, and it's not just cooking at home. It's like you're going for a show, and again, the best people who are at it treat it like a show, that it's a stage, and as such, like, you need to pay for what it's worth. You need to pay for the enjoyment of it, of the soul, of the fun of it all. So I'm just hoping to help my clients make it simpler with their clients, because that's been a big change. And it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I mean, I've been watching and seeing a lot of restaurants. Suddenly, then they're sitting on all this wine, which through April and May they didn't have an outlet for, physical outlet. In the old times. And you would say innovation and survival
together and pragmatism means what have we got to sell? What are we sitting on that we can actually sell? And those I don't know. It makes me kind of sad. Maybe is not the right word, but it's almost like that situation that has come about by the innovation and just the kind of survival attitude. And it's like it's a shame that they're then potentially being punished for that further down the line by the kind of savvy customers that kind of remembers the prices they were paying to have it at home.
I know, like it's a funny thing, isn't it? Because and we all do it. We all complain about price, and for numerous things across our daily lives, and it's always such a tough thing. But if anyone is actually listening who is not in hospitality and never has been into it, I can utterly promise you that no one I really know makes that much money, and that is even the people who have big restaurant sites. I'm not talking about the really big boys, but they've done it ever since day one because they loved it and wanted to do it, and a little bit for everyone's ego, because do you know what? I'm very happy to admit that I have got a medium to large size ego because I have to do that to perform and to be on top of my game. But no one's doing it because they're out to stiff anyone or to make loads of money. The tax man makes far more than anyone. That no matter what I sell to one of my customers, which is Quality Wines now, for a bottle of wine, it's £2.23 is just duty on, and then 20% is VAT. So for something the costs are huge, massive, and their costs are massive, and I just want everyone to really know that the majority of people do this just because they truly want to do it, because they love it, and they're not going into it for a big payday. They're going into it because it's what drives them every day, and that's why I'm so proud to be part of the business. Actually now I'm really not. I'm outside. I feel actually a bit sad. I miss it still. And I did a service on Monday, and I was just like, I forgot how lovely this was to serve customers. But then I found it weird because I was like, it's not my place. So quality always felt a bit like my place, and it always will remain that. But it'll be interesting to see if we can move over and move around from this kind of stage of people being very concerned on the price of something from retail to being in a restaurant. But that might change by people not eating out as much. So that instead, when they do go out, they will spend the money on that and not feel upset with it. They just won't be going out as much. They'll be drinking more at home, which looks like more than likely.
One of the things that I'm keen to sort of draw out as well from the guests right the way across the series is that idea of innovation. The idea of, as we've just covered, turning on a dime, and I want to purposely keep it fairly broad. But I'm just curious. Are there any, or were there any innovations that kind of surprised you, that you kind of saw a brand or saw a restaurant? There's so many. And this is it. I mean, we obviously can't name or check all of them, but I'm just wondering, were there some that really kind of stood out for you? And
for me, there were numerous ones that stood out for so many different reasons. Yeah. So someone like Nick at the Draper's Arms, because he backed his staff, so he was always trying to make sure his staff got paid, which for me is probably the most important thing, that he saw his team as being the most important thing. So massive shout out just for the ability to empathise, because empathy is the biggest skill you have in restauranting, and I think he was a great example of that. But obviously people like Top Cuvée, obviously have done such a great job with creating really good vibes, which was so important during that time, of creating energy and not just hey, we sell stuff and it's a disaster. Being this is, let's be honest, life is tough, but let's still have fun, which I think it was so important. My old businesses at Vinoteca did such a great job from being able to actually use Deliveroo as a platform. Like, I don't think it's a good platform, but they actually used it really well. But also that one of their owners, and they've got 5 sites, was out driving like meals and wine to people. I mean, it showed that like he really, really cared, and that they care about their customers and their business and their staff. That they were in the trenches. So leading from the front was one of the major things. But even with like here and lots of other places was people deciding to almost take not so much a pay cut, because everyone's now taking a pay cut. If you're not in hospitality, almost everyone in hospitality is taking a pay cut, but taking a job, like that their job roles have changed. Like people who had head positions now have to do a lot more stuff. And and a massive shout out goes to all of those kind of people who are very willing to do all the crap jobs, just because they knew they had to. Also, there's a great chef called Anna Tobias, and like big respect to people like her who were cooking at home for people in the NHS in her home kitchen, which is tiny, like cooking hundreds of meals. I mean, that kind of stuff is like absolutely astoundingly amazing. There was obviously 67 Pall Mall did a great job on their online tastings, and deserve a lot of credit for like taking the idea of in what I do think, like I was probably the first who did small scale tastings, as in like 100 mils, but they took that sort of idea, and if they are first, I'm very sorry, and you deserve all the credit. But they took that on board to such a great scale and got such great winemakers and guests and stuff, and they really they created like a greatest hits album of wine producers, and in doing so, they can look back on this stage with real pride. But it's not just, but also just like loads of wine producers, so like Black Book and stuff, who are doing like great online tastings, but also home delivering to people all the time. To also wine importers who are coming up with ideas to keep their customers happy, like obviously like Nick at Modal, who is obviously he's such a lovely guy. But also like to businesses like across the country who try to keep staff on for as long as possible. Or who've weathered this storm. It's been... Look, I mean, people like to say like how amazing it's been, but how I see it is there's no other way. Like, it's like, think about like having your own business as you don't have a boss, but your boss is, if you fail, there's nothing left. So their boss was breathing down their neck harder than ever these past few months, and they still are. And the mental anguish it's caused loads of people from top down has been absolutely massive. But there are hopefully some people listening who have businesses who were literally on the front lines, like even Paola and Mike at Vindonista. Like, I mean, they were on the floor the whole time during this time. They're the owners. Those are the kind of people who deserve almost all the credit, because when you're an employee, like, there's only so much work you can put in, and there's only so much like vibe and energy you can put in. But when you lead from the front, it's like, it means everything. It helps everyone feel better. I mean, like, even with here, like Dan, one of our owners, was here every single day. His wife was here every single day working with us, even though they didn't need to, because when it was really shit, we had the greatest sales force in the world. They've got a shop manager called Alberto, who is literally one of the greatest salesmen I've ever seen. And Richard the Butcher can sell anything. So it was very, very lucky. But I think, so for me, the innovation is not so much on the tips and tricks and ideas. It's far more in the head of people having to mentally realise that their life has changed now for potentially a long time. Like, if you had shares in something that was like a hospitality business, they're now worth not much, because all the growth they had is gone. So it was the mental capacity to say, okay, I've got to start again mentally, and that is the well, to quote Frozen, like, letting it go is the hardest thing to do, but it's a fundamental thing to do. Like, you can't go back in time now. And as such, it's the big thing now is to make sure amazing people are being able to be offered jobs and get into the business, because it's now an obligation of all business owners now to make jobs, because no one is going to help them. I mean, the government might give them a leg up somehow, but they have to keep on pushing to try and give jobs.
Yeah, I totally echo that. I think it's actually refreshing that the innovation is like what's between the ears, basically, and how people are thinking and how they're acting. I think that's actually really refreshing, because you can buy apps, or you can you can buy anything. You can get your word out there on many different platforms, but the actual being there, as you say, with the wine in your hand, behind the till, rolling up your sleeves, you can't buy that. You can't outsource that. That's on you. It's obvious to those around you, and I'm guessing especially somewhere like this, but in so many venues that just went so much further than many other gestures, isn't it?
Well, also it was kind of interesting to see people who had already found the bite of last year quite tough, who had basically had basically just decided that they just couldn't do it, which is fair enough, really, and no one should feel bad about doing that, about saying, do you know what, this is too tough for me, I can't do this. But like, if it's a case of survival, you people had to dig in mentally very, very deep. I mean, like, at some point you'd be the first one to talk about my own mental anguish and my own mental health over this period, but it's been so up and down that it's unbelievable, and it's stabilised massively, which is fantastic. But it's so important to realise that in hospitality, especially, it was only last year people started, or maybe the year before, people started coming to terms with mental health first aiders and stuff, and that the whole concept of mental health was becoming much more prevalent in the business. So I think ideally this sort of time is good to grow from that, because ideally the really terrible people who've given people such mental anguish have not survived as well as they have in this time, because they've had to work very hard and they may not be into working that hard. But it's a real time for growth on that, and to make sure that what happens now is that companies, businesses make sure that the staff have as nice a working environment as possible, because everyone's getting paid less, so there's less customers. So it has to be assured that with less money comes less stress. And it's sad, because business owners will have to shoulder some of that burden, and it's just life. And it comes back full around to that margin thing of being not afraid to make people pay for what you need to pay to meet your budget. Your budget is your budget, like no one else knows it, but you need to make money and live and survive, and ideally be able to have children or a house one day, because that would be quite nice. So
and it's this tends to happen. Our minds kind of go to the same places. I was absolutely thinking back to that margin question, and you brought it up in a wine context in terms of the advice that you were sort of giving there. I mean, again, I want to try to amplify and get things out there. I mean, has that led into potentially other suggestions and other areas? I mean, the area that kind of came to mind, and I've been following the conversation a lot, has been the element of no-shows, because I'm guessing that is,
it's disruptive to margin. It's massive.
That's going to be huge. It's like a cancer, isn't it? It's that thing that just sort of sits there and draws.
Yeah, it does. I mean,
and I don't know that there is a universally agreed upon silver bullet.
Well, it's interesting to talk to someone like Alexis Noble at Wanda, who's got a very, very strong cancellation policy, which she's got a lot of stick from, especially from customers. But it actually works. That's the funniest thing. It's like people just don't no-show, or people don't no-show as much, or they don't they come and they make the intention, because it's almost like an intention is pointless if you don't show up. So I intend to buy this, I intend to do that. It's an absolute. It's like a booking is actually pointless. Everything is pointless if it's just an intention. You've got to follow through. So I think the only way to do it is by being as strong as possible and saying, this is it. And if someone gets upset about it, it's just like, this is a new world. But everyone has to be on the same page. Every single business has to do the exact same thing, because otherwise people will start being like, well, this place doesn't do this or doesn't do that. So my belief is someone like Alexis has done the right thing in making sure that it's as strong as possible. Which is interesting. She has less budgetary constraint as most people, but she works alone as a chef. So a really unusual and interesting example, but someone who's made it work during this time. And
that was brought in during this time and is now staying?
Yes.
Is now
I think so.
House policy.
Yes. And I would never want to comment on like Alexis's future or anything, because firstly she can talk for herself, and she's an absolute machine. Like, she's unbelievable. But I think just as seeing it as an example, it's just really tough seeing other friends' businesses go through such tough times with no-shows, and it'll mean some people won't turn up, but it's like, you can't go into a service thinking 10% won't show up, so then you just have to change the prices for everyone. Because just to pay for the staff is going to be absolutely massive. I mean, probably most customers don't think that if they don't turn up that they're maybe costing someone a job, but that is literally what they're doing. Not them identically, but if one table comes in of 4 who don't come, if 4 covers don't turn up, and they should be spending £60, that is at least 2 staff members' wage for the night. So I think it's got to be as strong as possible. In hospitality sometimes, and I think we've got into this adage especially, that the customer's always right, and I think maybe that time is gone, of being like that you have to fall back on this thing of trying to bend over backwards for with everyone, even if they don't love you. It's like being in an abusive relationship where someone is constantly abusing you, and you come back and I think the time is to say, this is being very open and honest and saying, this is why we have this policy, and being very strong on giving that example. And if the customer says that's ridiculous, then that is completely fine for them to believe that way. But it's also, hopefully, with the customers you have, will completely understand why you're doing it, because they want you to have a job, they want you to have a sense of purpose, and they want you to have a future. So I really firmly believe that, and I'm also could be completely wrong. This is just my opinion, but it just seems, as an example, Wonder have done a good job on making sure no shows haven't come back, because it's a contract, isn't it? Like, going out to eat is you're going to someone's home, whether you think it or not. And it's like, it's funny reading reviews at the moment, and I love reading reviews of on Google of like people's businesses and stuff. People have been really tough on businesses for not social distancing, when it's still a contract of having guests in your house, when it's not always up to the business to control people, and normally people who write the reviews will be like, but and it's not like personal, I'm just really like trying to help them out. Well, guess what, it's so personal. Like, everything said is so personal, and it's like, if like you can feedback is always really important, but just remember that this is someone's entire life, and it may not seem like it, but it is their entire life. Just be nice. Empathise. Empathy is the most important quality, always is. That's why Joey's the bloody best in the business. I'm not joking. Like, Joey, who took over for me, is one of the absolute gems of the business. I was so lucky to work alongside him when he was at the Chop House, but he's a very gifted guy.
I'm meeting him for the first time today, and I can
he's a very lovely guy.
Thumbs up, and totally go along with that.
And very modest, which is very rare sometimes in our business.
It's very interesting, though. I mean, it's kind of tying back in with your earlier analogy of service and hospitality and the theatre. It's always struck me as there are so many services that we pay for that are entertainment related. Where would you book a theatre ticket and then expect to not have to pay anything, and then just be able to same for a hotel room,
like go to for
a football game, for a flight. There's literally car rental. And okay, they're not the same, and there have been norms that have been established in food and drink outlets that are different, and it has sort of evolved in a different angle. But I don't know. It feels as though a precedent has been set by all those other industries, and
I think so.
The idea of everyone sort of moving together, it's a bit like the offside trap, you know. You've all got to go together. You can't just have one.
I mean, because also and it has to be given hand in hand with that. It's probably the greatest time in the world that you could be eating out in a restaurant, because in restaurants past, like if we were in like London in like 50 years ago, you go out for dinner and you probably spend about the same you would today, but with inflation. But the ingredients used would be absolutely terrible. So just imagine if all of that changed. It's just imagine if, sorry, like a guy outside just drunkenly just gestured at us, which was quite funny. That's what I was saying is that, but today, the ingredients being used by chefs across this whole country and the wine that's being sold is the best quality it could have ever been. They're paying the most money they could to make sure that you drink literally the greatest thing and eat the greatest thing possible. They are no one is stiffing you really. There are certain businesses obviously do, but if you go to an independent business that has been rated by bloody like Eater or anyone like that, like I can really promise you that the quality ingredient they use is a million times better than what would have done previously. So they're not making that much margin. They're not making a lot of money on it. Because like, you look in a retail shop, you go say, oh well, as I buy ham on in Sainsbury's for 10 quid and it's like 22 quid at like like at somewhere. But firstly, like the economies of scale are huge, and it's just the quality is so much better. Like it's one of those things that I think people just forget sometimes, that right now people spend, chefs and professional kitchens and professional restaurants spend so much money on product. They're trying their best to give as best as possible, and I think because of that, people should just realise that and say, okay, so maybe just most places should just start selling worse produce again.
But with your soul in it and with your heart, you're not going to want to do that, are you?
Exactly.
You might
exactly
serve
that.
less of a better ingredient, but
it's true.
No one wants. And I think I'll open Pandora's box and kind of see where we go. But that's always been the point that I've made, because that you're right. There is a lot of misconception that the restaurants are totally killing it in terms of the marking up and. Yeah. But at the end of the day, the kind of unseen cost, the cost that you can't eat and you can't touch and you can't taste, is the rent, isn't it? That is the one that's always there on the bill, and is a part of the markup, isn't it? It's a part of the of the piece.
Like you rack up like a cost of a day of operating somewhere, it becomes absolutely mental. Like, as I once talked to my dad about it, so he's eaten in restaurants for a very long time. But never really understood how much money they actually make, and I was just like, oh well, in a good year as a restaurateur, you might make a very good year, you might make 3 or 4% profit overall. And he was like, are you joking? I was like, no. And he was just like, and I was like, and I'll give you an example. I was at Vinoteca one day, someone put the wrong chemical into a glass washer, and it actually broke the glass washer. So that's what, 3-4 grand. Like in a moment something can happen, or on a night you lose 4 glasses and they cost you £4 each. That's £16. But then also you break 2 plates, or 3 get chips, you then got to replace those. A staff member's ill, so you have to, that they have a sick day, so that you can't, so you lose basically days of wage, which is completely fair. You have to throw away some food because you don't sell it, or you throw away some food because someone says that they don't like it, or there's something on it that they didn't like, or they had an allergy that came out of nowhere that suddenly they said that they can't have garlic, or they taste the one, they say, oh, I don't really like it, instead of being like, oh, okay, actually that's really interesting, I'll sit with it for a second. All these costs add up to make it literally, why'd you ever get into it? Why would you literally ever get into this business? And really, because you're probably a little bit mental or stupid, or most importantly, you're so passionate about it and you truly love it. And I think that the last thing is the most important thing to really sit on, is that this is all passion. This is all for that little part of your ego where you say, do you know what, I can do this. And you might not do it forever, but yeah, it's tough, those things, when people start to make comment on those things. It's almost all my friends from home aren't in my business, so like I've had a lot of those sorts of those narratives.
Totally. And I guess the big, government support since furlough and since any support for sole traders and limited companies, I guess where things have been promoted as having roared back has been the Eat Out to Help Out. Has been that as a program, and I don't know, has that been relevant for the people that your customers now, and
really relevant.
What has been their I'm sure varying reactions, and as we sit here, interestingly, Eat Out to Help Out having run throughout all of August, and we're just at that sort of finish point. What is the sort of immediate future for some of those people that you're working with?
So firstly, that they were probably busier than ever in any August they would have ever had, because August is historically the slowest month of the year for hospitality businesses, because everyone goes on holiday and people just don't really drink and eat out that much. They do barbecues and entertain and go away, but it's the busiest August most businesses have had ever. But this coming back off a situation which was very tough. They've been so busy. It's been quite relentless for them, which is one thing to think about, that they've had quite a tough time, both mentally and physically. But at least they've had money flowing through the coffers. The real thing to ask is that will customers still be coming back after this? Because they've just said they've kind of drunk and eaten out enough, and will they come back? And will they go to those restaurants they went to during Eat Out to Help Out? Because they just go to them because it was like food tourism, or was it because they generally wanted to go? So is it a reprieve? And I think most businesses will say that they were happy to have taken part in it, but in the long term it might not help them, because people might just get into the head that that's what food costs these days, when it just doesn't. It's just, for most businesses that I've talked to, they can't afford to give a 50% off on food for like a load of people. That's the difference between them not even being able to make money for themselves, let alone to keep their staff afloat. So we have quite a bad thing in this country, but not just in this country, but across the world, of discount culture. And I think the discount culture can really bite you in the bum quite hard. I mean, like, the supermarkets have found it so hard, where they've been in these price wars for so many years that they've now been beaten really by Lidl and Aldi, who come in with less product numbers and can actually make money. But that discount culture has really can be it can be like a slow rot. It can just be sitting in your bloody in your vine trunk for a long time before it kills off the vine. And so I just really hope that on a consumer level, people just realised that was a great time, and they were doing it for a good thing, not just to get a discount. They were doing it because they were helping out local businesses. But who knows if that remains true. And also, we'll see how Christmas is. We've got Brexit coming up, which is another big thing, which a lot of people they've not had time to prepare for, which is the massive elephant in the room. Which, if anyone has read any of the legislation on that, most things will stay the same when it comes to food and drink, but it'll be matched by currency. So if our currency goes up, it's fantastic. But if it goes down, it's going to be a very expensive time for a lot of people. Suddenly it'll be a lot more arguments of why is this so expensive. So, yeah. It's very interesting times, and it's impossible to predict. I think you can't really go into it to predict it, saying this is what's going to happen. But what else to really say about it? Really, is Eat Out to Help Out was good short term, bad long term. What do you think?
Well, I think the sort of looking in the media, and social media, you get the micro feedback from punters, from restaurant owners, and it has been such a mixed set of responses. There have been people that definitely I think have got the kind of, we need, cash is king, and we need the coffers, we need people through the door, literally or virtually. We're on like recovery here. We need our boost, and there's a lot of people that have said, I've heard they're saying they're happy it's finishing, and I would imagine for similar sorts of reasons that it is, and I think it was probably intended as a short-term sticking plaster.
That's true,
and that it's probably not sustainable for your government to subsidise a whole industry. Definitely.
Well, a few businesses are going to stick with it as well. So some of them, their landlord are going to pay for it, which is pretty amazing. But it shows you how much landlords how much money they actually have.
As much as the government.
Yeah, exactly. As much as the government.
They can take on the government scheme. So.
It's true. They can just take
furlough by landlords. Hopefully coming soon. Yeah.
Shit the bed. But some people just are continuing it because they do fear, if no one turns up, then they'll have to close. So they're like that. They will just go in with it. They're saying, well, we have to kind of go along with it. But I still kind of believe that the best places will always get customers through the door. As in, like, the places with the most vibe. I mean, like, it's like I don't worry about places like Max's Sandwich Shop or something, because Max is hilarious, but also he's got a very magnanimous character that people go not just for a very, very good sandwich, but because of the fun. And they realise that, again, it's a performance. So I think those places should still succeed. Mm-hmm. It's just, I think, a lot of places who aren't that, who are much more part of like an industry as such, should do better. That they'll kind of struggle without having the Eat Out to help out.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's been super interesting to, again, I think give the issues and give your thoughts and the thoughts of, I think, some of your customers and friends. Just give them some air. For it not to be a 10-second slot on the news or a byline in the newspaper, to actually kick around some of these topics. But I do want to, I think as well, give you a chance to just expand a little bit more on what you're trying to do with your company now, because I did think that was an interesting point you raised earlier about the working with the restaurants, and I guess like navigating potentially people's awareness of the prices on different wines, and I'm just curious, as far as you're able to, or as far as you want to, just talk to us a bit about what it is that is kind of on your horizon, really. What is happening? What's going on with you and your business?
Well, so obviously how was originally going to be approached was, I thought I'd be selling wine to a lot more restaurants, but obviously, and I do sell wine to restaurants, but not that much, because I don't have as many customers in, so they're not selling as much wine by the glass and stuff like that. So retail has become far more of king in general. But wine importing and wine distribution is not technically, you can't really reinvent the wheel. There's lots of ways to try and do it, but it doesn't always work, because the fundamental thing still is you've got to get something from A to B and then sell that thing, and then you've got to make sure people kind of understand the story behind it. And that's what I still do with my small set of producers. But again, we are making and labelling wine. My business partner is a winemaker, but also have a winemaker in Australia as well, who does some work for us, and it helps us helps people find wines at a kind of a better price point that no one else really has. So it makes it a bit simpler for them, ideally, to again, find that margin so that they can survive and not feel awkward or ashamed by the price of something they're selling for. Because what's hard with so many wines now is you can just like see the price of something. But for our sort of future, really, will be kind of like growing still into the regions that we take part of. We're going to help them build our producers, because how wine importing goes is you buy a product off a winemaker, but you represent them as well. So I'm always there for representation. I'm not just there to buy a product and sell it and then move on, because that's not how it should be. How I've always worked is regulars are the most important thing, and my producers now are my most important thing, where making sure that they're looked after and that people get their wines and like their wines and understand them, and they get seen, they get a bit of airtime. So that's what I'm just trying to do with them. So not just also import and distribute like everyone else, but also make sure that they get seen by wine writers, get seen out and about, that they get seen more often than not, just so they feel a sense of pride, because a lot of them don't make any money either, really. Because winemaking is another one of those things like restauranting. You do it mostly for the love. Bar if you're buying your very, very mass-produced wine, then it's done mostly on business, like Wolf Glass or something. But I'm just trying to make sure that they still have a little bolt hole that people can engage with their thing. Because let's say this one we're having now from Yannick is, if suddenly no one could travel anymore and no one could get to Chablis, or even get to France, then how would they ever come into contact with that? So would anyone even care about Chablis? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, Chablis is a really kind of famous wine region, with some really funny old producers and some amazing ones as well. But I'm there to try and hopefully just bring a bit of that to a British consumer, and especially a new one. Is the most important thing as well, is to engage with the younger generation, to make sure they're drinking wine, not in a weird like silly way, but it's very fundamental that this is alcohol, it gets you drunk, it's ethanol, it gives you a hangover no matter what, but it's an amazing thing to drink. It's like you've trapped a moment in time, and I think it's really, really important that's what I always get across with, especially my business, but even with wines I don't represent, to make sure that gets across. But also the future will hold that I'll have to source more wine that is better value, because if the economy goes down and people can't afford to drink as much, I want to make sure they can still drink wine, because I'd never want them to end up just drinking like Glen's vodka and Carling, because let's be honest, do those companies really care about you? Maybe not. So I still want to take care of my poorest customer, because that is always the most important thing. Because otherwise, it's just, again, what's the point? It's when I first drank wine, I fucking drank Blossom Hill, for fuck's sake. It's terrible to admit, but you have to. You have to say that your entry is sometimes probably the most terrible product that there is. But it helped start my whole life. And my life is literally, without this, I don't know what it is. I really don't know. I spend the majority of my day thinking about it. It's that, and then my fiance and my family and my friends. But wine takes up the most time mentally, and it came through one of the worst wines you could ever buy. So, but also I have to be clear, I'll never be like selling that sort of thing, or not at my stage anyway, or not yet. You never know how big I'll get. But I have ambitions, like with quality wines. I was tasked to make the best wine bar in London. If I can try my best, I'll make the best wine importer in England. But the jury's out at the moment, and we're very much at the start, and we've got 7 people we sell to. So, but thankfully they're every end of the country, from St Andrews to Cornwall to London. So we're quite lucky.
Another huge thank you to you, Gus, for taking part in the Hospitality Summit. I really feel as though your reflections took us on something of that journey that we've all been on through the lockdown. And I love that you were able to illustrate your points with specific examples from London hospitality. If you're listening on the Interpreting Wine website, you can of course check below for the full transcript of this session. The PDF also includes my key takeaway points, and I've of course included the website and main social media handles for GB Shippers. That concludes day 1 of the Interpreting Wine Hospitality Summit and our look at wine in the capital. Day 2 of the Hospitality Summit will focus on restaurants and features 2 highly influential chefs, Chantel Nicholson of Treadwell's and Matt Gillen of Heritage Restaurant, both sharing some really interesting insights into how their restaurants were affected during the pandemic. So do be sure to check back for day 2 of the Interpreting Wine Hospitality Summit. See you then.